So Chris, thanks so much for taking a little bit of time with me. I know you're busy talking to a lot of people because you just spoke last night on hash and the occult and magic and the nexus between them all. And I gotta tell you, ever since I saw you do your bit on Hash Church several months ago, I'm all like, I would really like to meet this guy, because while I haven't researched a lot into the occult, I've read enough about the OTO and Aleister Crowley and some of the occult uses of hash that when you were talking, I was picking up what you were putting down, right?
Right, nice.
And so I figure I'm probably not the only one who has read some of the Crowley books and would be interested in knowing like this little facet of this huge research body that you have. So I hope that you'd like kind of break it all down for us, the cross section of hashish and the occult. Just give us a little bit to draw us in.
Probably one of the foremost books in the Western, like origins of the Western occult tradition, is this 13th century document, the Picatrix. It's actually a translation of a 10th century Islamic document, the Gayat al-Hakim, and it has a recipe for invoking the servant of the moon with over a pound of cannabis resin.
A pound of resin, not even a pound of flour.
Yeah, a pound of resin, mixed with stag's blood and some other herbs, and then you see the spirit and the smoke over it. So it goes that far back, right to the origins of the Western magical tradition. In the 16th century, we have grimoires like the Sefer Raziel and the Book of Oberon that have recipes for a cannabis ointment to be used for mirror scrying.
Right.
And there's evidence that John Dee was using the same practice. So there was nothing new, and even before Crowley in the 19th century, figures like Helena Blavatsky, who you probably heard of,
yep.
She wrote about her use of hashish and said she experienced previous lifetimes on it, and figures I mentioned in my talk yesterday, like Pascal Beverly Randolph, a Rosicrucian and sex magician, very influential on Crowley's OTO. And in the OTO itself, it's interesting, the founder of the OTO, Theodore Roos, he was actually an opera singer at one time in this opera by Wagner, Richard Wagner, called Parsifal. And the foremost Wagner autobiographer who knew Wagner, he says that Wagner was inspired to make the opera itself after being turned on to Indian hemp extract by Arthur Schopenhauer, the famous philosopher, right? So it's already kind of an element.
You can feel it bubbling.
And so Crowley was later initiated into the OTO and became the Grand Master. And they said that something he had published revealed one of their great secrets, And it's interesting because around that same time, he published The Psychology of Hashish, kind of a scientific essay on how cannabis was affecting the mind. And I think that, Crowley said it really well. He says, what hashish is doing is bringing up the subconscious into the conscious. And I think that's really the pivotal aspect of cannabis's role in magic and alchemy and stuff like that.
And to go deeper on that same point then, so are you suggesting that they're like, okay, we have the hash, and it isn't really about let's party because we're wealthy and we're in the party class, but they're like, no. But because we're occultists, meaning we want to dive deep into the human psyche, and we're using hashish as a tool.
Cool, absolutely. It was never, like Crowley made it quite clear, he didn't think that cannabis alone would bring somebody to these higher levels of consciousness, that it took a good focused amount of work. And magic was a technique of also doing that in combination with cannabis. So, and you got to remember too, in a lot of these instances, these weren't people that were using cannabis all the time. This was something that was used specifically for mirror scrying.
These are ceremonies. I mean, this is ritual magic.
Yeah, ritual magic. So they weren't like really used to the cannabis high like a lot of people are today. And in some cases, I was talking about the Zoroastrian examples of these guys like Ardu Viraf and Vishtaspa. They were ingesting very potent extracts, which is not like casually smoking a joint with some friends, you know what I mean? These type of potions, they can knock you right out, and you can have a full-on visionary experience on it.
Well, right. I think a lot of people don't realize that, we smoke hash and we smoke flower, but back in these days, people would take balls of hash and, the hash eaters, right?
Yeah.
They would eat hash, and at that level, it's kind of psychedelic.
Absolutely. I talked about Louis Alphonse Cahagnet yesterday, another figure from the 19th century, and his book, Sanctuary of Spiritualism, was stories of people ingesting 3 grams of hashish and strong coffee, and then they would record their experiences. And these experiences are very otherworldly.
I had never heard of. Is it called mirror scrying?
Mirror scrying, yeah.
Scrying. So I had never heard of that until your talk last night. And so, am I correct? It would be like you would get really high and in touch with your, bring up the unconscious using the hash, and then you essentially stare into it until your mind fills that void with
that's
stuff?
right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Same with crystal gazing.
Like a crystal ball. Oh.
Actually, same technique. And John D, who I mentioned yesterday, used both the blackened mirrors for mirror scrying and crystal balls. So they're kind of one and the same, really. But you could even use, like in some of the ancient literature, people just stare into a cup, and any sort of reflective surface. You know what I mean? And
something that can give suggestions back to your mind to play with.
Yeah.
So I was curious. So were they what we would call dealing? Were they like importing the hash and then also selling, or was that like below them because they were the higher class, so they were just buying it and then using it for their magic?
And the OTO?
Yeah, totally.
Crowley, for a big part of the time he was using it, it wasn't illegal. So he was using extracts he was getting through a pharmacist, and there were pharmacists that he was involved with that were also in
it's funny to think about it in a non-prohibited time.
The Golden Dawn as well as his mescaline extracts. He was getting them from Park Davis. And visited Park Davis and went to the company and purchased it right there and checked out their factory and that type of stuff. And in the OTO, in Martin Starr's The Unknown God, which is like a history of the first California lodge of the OTO, guys that are in the OTO are growing cannabis indica. And this is after Prohibition, so they were still continuing to use cannabis, after it had been illegal, and grow it and supply it themselves.
Right on. Well, they knew they had a good thing going, that's for sure. So, cocaine certainly comes up in the Crowley books.
Absolutely.
And in retrospect, his reputation is just peppered with, cocaine and the rumors of him eating babies. People, the kind of trash people talk about Satanists, when really that's not really what it's about. Was he pretty much just kind of like a freelance, do all the drugs kind of guy, or did he have a special place for hash?
Well, he had a special place for cannabis. He acknowledged in his writings that he'd struggled with both addiction under cocaine and heroin particularly, which he suffered with till his death. You got to remember that a lot of heroin use was medical, and Crowley's use of heroin was often medical. He was prescribed it by doctors. They would prescribe it for asthma and other ailments and stuff like that. So he became addicted through pharmaceutical use. It's not like he was like on the street heroin user or something like that. He was getting pharmaceutical drugs and had become a little too accustomed to them. It's a sad story.
It's a common modern story too.
Modern story as well, right? And he really struggled with it. He wrote about that struggle. He thought that cannabis and mescaline were particularly the drugs for loosening the girders of the soul. And this is a term he borrowed from the Chaldean oracles of Zoroaster, particularly the translation done by Dr. Wynne Westcott, the founder of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, who also wrote about the use of cannabis for magical purposes. So he considered them more magical substances than cocaine or heroin, for sure. He wasn't down on cocaine, but he made a really good comment one time about like how you kind of kill a plant when you extract the active chemical out of it. And he thought there was a big difference between the coca that somebody would chew in Peru and run through the mountains than cocaine. And
which is super processed.
Yeah, which is super processed. And also between raw opium and heroin. And he thought that in its natural form, with all its natural alkaloids and stuff like that, the plant was still kind of like a living entity, but extracted like that, you killed the plant.
It's kind of like old school whole plant medicine.
Yeah.
We know that Crowley wrote about hash, and then you've mentioned a couple other folks who have written about hash. Are those books, did they age well? Are they still relevant and interesting to read nowadays, or do we know so much more that they're kind of outdated?
Well, Crowley's Psychology of Hashish, I think, is worth a read, especially if you're into like yogic meditation, because it uses a lot of the states of consciousness in yoga as an analogy for the hashish intoxication and different levels of intoxication. So I think it's pretty readable, and there's definitely, I would say, a growing scene around Crowley and OTO magic right now. There seems to be a real renaissance of that type of stuff, maybe due to the popularity of the Strange Angel TV series. Strange Angel, based on rocket scientist Jack Parsons, who has a crater named on him on the moon. named after him on the moon. He was also a cannabis user and wrote about it, you know, and referred to it in one of his poems, you know, and did mescaline in the desert for magic rituals with L. Ron Hubbard.
Oh my God.
Founder of Scientology, for his break off into Scientology. So, yeah, pretty interesting history for sure.
Right on, cool. Well, before I let you go, I wanted you to give a plug to it. You have a new book out, right?
Yeah, that's right. Liber 420, Cannabis, Magical Herbs, and the Occult. You can find it on Amazon, or if you Google Liber 420, you can find some interviews about it.
Right on.
That sort of thing.
And if you look in the first comment, there's going to be a link there, so that makes it super easy. So, Chris Bennett, thank you so much for your time. It's nice to hang out with you.
You as
Right
well.
on.